On my son's birthday, he said something that cut straight through me. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "The best present you could give me is disappearing from my life forever." I forced a smile, said nothing, and quietly walked away, leaving him to enjoy his party. Less than an hour later, police cars rolled up, surrounded my property, and took my son away in handcuffs. What happened after that still feels unreal. I was standing at the back entrance, struggling to balance a chocolate birthday cake in my left hand while trying to turn the door handle. The cake was homemade, layered carefully, and still warm underneath the frosting. I had planned to surprise my son Ethan before anyone noticed me. Inside the kitchen drawer, 28 candles were ready to be placed on top, but I wanted to get inside first and make the moment special. Under my right arm, I held a neatly wrapped box containing a vintage wristwatch Ethan had admired months earlier. It was not just any watch. It had belonged to my father, passed down through generations, and I had decided this was the right time to give it to him. I believed it meant something. I believed he would appreciate it. Through the glass door, laughter drifted out into the cool evening air. I recognized Ethan's voice immediately, mixed in with several others, loud and animated. It was early September, one of those perfect late summer evenings when the air smells like grilled meat and spilled beer. The weather could not have been better for a 28th birthday party. I paused just outside the door, telling myself to wait a moment so I would not interrupt an important conversation. From where I stood, I could see into the backyard. Ethan was near the grill with his usual friends, Tyler and Logan, laughing as he flipped burgers. His girlfriend, Rachel, sat at the patio table scrolling on her phone while other guests wandered around the yard with drinks in their hands. "Man, your dad really went all out for this," Tyler said loudly enough for me to hear. "New speakers, top-shelf beer, and even a catering service for the appetizers." Ethan took a long drink from his bottle and shrugged. "Yeah, well, he always does this. He thinks throwing money at things makes up for everything else." I stopped breathing for a moment. The cake felt heavier in my hand, and the gift pressed awkwardly against my ribs. "At least he gives a damn," Logan said. "My father has not even called me in half a year." Ethan laughed, but there was no kindness in it. "Trust me, you are luckier than you think. He is constantly on me about getting a job, moving out, being responsible. Like he does not realize how bad the economy is right now." My fingers tightened around the edge of the cake plate. I watched through the glass as my son waved his beer bottle dismissively. "Honestly," Ethan continued, "the best birthday gift I could get would be for the old man to finally disappear from my life. I am sick of the lectures and the control." The words landed like a punch to my chest. I staggered backward and nearly dropped the cake. 28 years of raising him, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school plays, late-night talks, scraped knees, and college tuition collapsed into a single sentence. "Never would have guessed your father was so intense," Tyler said, lifting his bottle in a mocking toast. Logan laughed. "He probably has your whole future planned out on some spreadsheet. That is what engineers do, right?" "Exactly," Ethan said. "It is always his way or nothing." He turned slightly toward the house, and I quickly pressed myself flat against the wall beside the door. The wrapped gift slipped from under my arm and landed softly on the welcome mat. I caught it just before my knees gave out. Inside that box was my father's watch, something I had protected my entire life. In that moment, it felt meaningless. "Why do you not just move out?" Rachel called without looking up from her phone. "With what money?" Ethan replied. "He controls everything and treats me like I am still a kid. But hey, free rent is free rent." The group burst into laughter again. I stood there, frozen, a 62-year-old man holding a birthday cake for a son who wished I would vanish forever. The candles waiting in the kitchen drawer suddenly seemed ridiculous. What exactly was I celebrating? My hand started shaking, and the cake wobbled dangerously as memories flooded in. I remembered Ethan's college graduation party, where he had introduced me as the guy who pays for everything. I remembered family dinners where he rolled his eyes at every story I told. I remembered Christmas mornings when he barely looked up from his phone while opening gifts I had spent weeks choosing. Had I really been this blind for 28 years? I leaned against the door frame trying to steady myself. Inside the house, my kitchen was decorated with streamers and banners I had put up earlier that day. The dining table was covered in wrapped presents, each one chosen carefully, each one meant to show love. To him, it was all just control and interference. Outside, the party carried on as if I did not exist. Ethan moved back toward the grill, flipping burgers while Tyler told a story that had everyone laughing. They looked relaxed and comfortable, openly mocking the man who paid for the house beneath their feet, the food on their plates, and the electricity powering the music. I slowly stepped away from the door, the cake still trembling in my hands. The watch felt like a stone in my other hand. Through the glass, I watched my son enjoy a celebration funded entirely by someone he wished would disappear. The pain in my chest hardened into something else, something colder and sharper. I thought about the mortgage I had been paying for years, the utilities, the insurance, the property taxes, the groceries, and the car in the driveway that Ethan drove without ever asking. Everything he relied on while openly wishing I was gone. I turned toward the kitchen, my thoughts beginning to shift. If Ethan wanted me out of his life so badly, maybe it was time to give him exactly what he asked for, just not in the way he imagined. The cake could wait. The candles could wait. There were phone calls I needed to make first. About 10 minutes passed after I pulled myself back into the kitchen. The birthday cake sat untouched on the counter, the frosting beginning to sag slightly where my hands had shaken too much to keep it steady. I paced back and forth between the refrigerator and the window, watching Ethan laugh and drink in the backyard while my mind replayed every word he had said. The shock slowly burned down into something heavier and sharper. When I finally slid the back door open again, my steps were deliberate and controlled. I did not bring the cake. I did not bring the gift. I did not bring any fake smile or celebratory tone. I walked outside as a father who needed answers from a son who no longer showed even basic respect. Ethan was exactly where I had left him, standing near the grill with a beer in his hand, talking animatedly with Tyler and Logan. Smoke from the barbecue drifted lazily between us as I stepped into their circle. A few guests noticed me approaching and glanced over, probably assuming I was about to complain about the music or tell them to clean something up. "Ethan," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the laughter, "we need to talk. Privately." He turned toward me with the same casual indifference he had always shown when consequences were supposed to matter. It was the same look he wore when I caught unauthorized charges on my credit card, or when neighbors called to complain about late-night parties while I was working double shifts. "Dad, whatever you heard," he said flatly, not lowering his voice at all, "it is true. You interfere in my life, and everyone here knows it." The bluntness stunned me. There was no embarrassment, no hesitation, no attempt to soften the blow. Just confidence, built on a lifetime of never being held accountable. "How can you say that?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. "After everything I have done for you?" "No one asked you to," Ethan replied, taking another long drink. Tyler and Logan nodded along like an approving jury. "You chose to support me. That does not mean I owe you anything." Tyler stepped closer, resting a hand near Ethan's shoulder. "He has a point, sir. Parents choose to have kids." That casual cruelty hit even harder than Ethan's words. These were the people reinforcing his entitlement, dressing disrespect up as philosophy. I looked around the backyard, my backyard, paid for with my money, maintained with my labor, and noticed more guests turning toward us, their curiosity growing. 28 years, I said, my tone calm even as anger coiled tight in my chest. 28 years of providing everything you needed. "And I never asked for any of it," Ethan shot back, his voice louder now, fueled by the audience. "You want gratitude for things I did not request? That is your issue, not mine." Logan laughed sharply. Classic old-school mindset. "I sacrificed, so you owe me." By then, several conversations had stopped completely. A loose circle formed around us as people watched openly. Some looked uneasy, others entertained. This was not uncomfortable for them. It was drama, something they would talk about later. "So, when you told your friends you wished I would disappear forever," I said slowly, "you meant it." For just a moment, surprise flickered across Ethan's face. He had not expected me to know his exact words. The crack closed almost instantly, replaced by irritation. "Yes," he said, "I meant it. You hover, you lecture, you turn everything into your expectations." He waved his bottle, splashing beer onto the patio stones. "If you found your own life instead of trying to control mine, we would both be happier." More people had gathered now. Music still played in the background, but conversations across the yard had faded. I could feel their judgment settling on me, the overbearing father, the problem parent. "This house," I said, each word deliberate, "this food, this car you drive, all paid for by someone you wish would disappear." "That is right," Ethan replied with a smile that held no warmth at all. "And when you finally do move on, I will miss the free rent for about 5 minutes. Then I will figure something else out." Rachel laughed from the patio table, finally looking up from her phone. "Ethan, you are awful," she said lightly, like it was a compliment. Her amusement blended with the chuckles from Tyler and Logan, creating a soundtrack of mockery around my humiliation. I stood there while people celebrated my son's cruelty. 28 years of late nights, school projects, driving lessons, tuition payments, and quiet sacrifices had been reduced to public ridicule. The party continued around us. Music played, burgers sizzled, guests drank my beer and ate my food while watching the final collapse of respect between father and son. I turned away from the circle of faces. Some smirked. Others suddenly found the ground interesting. Ethan's laughter followed me as I walked back toward the house, but something inside me had shifted. The pain was no longer raw. It was settling into something colder, and far more focused. He wanted me gone. That could be arranged. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step creaking under my weight, carrying me farther from the noise and laughter echoing below. I closed my bedroom door gently behind me, shutting out the celebration of my own humiliation. I stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle. Through the walls, I could still hear muffled voices, bottles clinking, Ethan's voice rising above the rest with another joke at my expense. Through the window, shadows moved across the patio stones as guests wandered through the yard, unaware that everything had already begun to change. The mirror above my dresser showed me a man I barely recognized. I stood there wondering when I had turned into someone who absorbed insults in silence, someone who mistook patience for strength and generosity for love. When had I become a man who kept providing for a son who openly wished I did not exist? The reflection staring back at me looked tired, hollow, and worn down in ways sleep could not fix. As I stared at myself, memories surged forward without warning. Last spring came back to me with painful clarity. The car incident. Ethan had dragged me to 3 different dealerships in one weekend, insisting I co-sign for vehicles far beyond anything he could realistically afford. Each time I suggested something modest and practical, he rolled his eyes. At the 3rd dealership, he turned to the salesman with exaggerated embarrassment. "Sorry about my dad," he said loudly. "He does not understand that image matters in my industry." The salesman had shifted uncomfortably, but Ethan was not finished. "He thinks driving something decent is showing off," he added. "That is what happens when you settle for mediocrity your whole life." I remembered standing there with my checkbook in hand, my face burning, still preparing to help him secure transportation. In the end, we bought a used Honda for $15,000, entirely paid for by me. He complained about that car for months, as if it were an insult rather than a gift. Another memory surfaced before I could push it away. The Christmas dinner. I had invited Ethan's friends over, hoping to build some kind of bridge. I spent days cooking, cleaning, and preparing, determined to show them that I was not the controlling villain my son had apparently described. During dessert, Tyler had leaned back in his chair and smiled thinly. "So, Mr. Carter, Ethan tells us you're pretty strict about everything," he said. "Must be hard having someone watching your every move." Ethan lifted his wine glass and laughed. "You have no idea. Dad always thinks he knows what is best for everyone." I had sat there at the head of my own table, pouring wine I had purchased, serving food I had cooked, while people openly mocked me under my roof. Worse, my son had conducted the entire performance. And I had smiled. I had played the gracious host. I had enabled every bit of it. That realization stung more than any single insult. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, Ethan had finally said the quiet part out loud, and something inside me had shifted for good. I walked to the window and looked down into the backyard. There he was, energized and animated, holding a fresh beer and gesturing dramatically as he spoke. He was probably retelling his latest triumph over the old man upstairs. His friends stood around him like an audience, laughing on cue, feeding off his confidence. They were all standing on my property, eating my food, drinking my alcohol, celebrating my humiliation. How many years had I been financing my own disrespect? The analytical side of my mind finally clicked on, the same part I had relied on throughout my career. I began breaking the situation down the way I always had. Inputs, variables, constraints, outcomes. Ethan wanted me gone from his life. I wanted basic respect, or at the very least, an end to open contempt. My current strategy, patience, generosity, hoping gratitude would eventually appear, had failed completely. It was time for a new approach. I turned back toward the mirror. This time, I did not see a victim or a doormat. I saw a man with resources, leverage, and the clarity to use them. Ethan was 28 years old and had never held a steady job. He had no savings, no meaningful credit history, and no real-life skills beyond consuming what others provided. His entire lifestyle existed because I allowed it to. And that realization brought an unsettling calm. I owned the house outright. Every utility bill, every insurance payment, every property tax statement came directly from my accounts. The refrigerator he raided, the internet he streamed endlessly, the electricity powering his late-night gaming sessions, all of it was mine. What would happen if that support simply vanished? The answer settled over me with chilling clarity. If Ethan truly wanted me gone from his life, maybe it was time to honor that request, but on my terms, not his. I stepped toward the bedroom door, my hand resting on the handle. Downstairs, the party continued without a hint of awareness. Music played, laughter echoed, drinks were poured. Ethan had asked for distance from his father's influence. Soon, he would have all the distance he could possibly manage. By then, 25 minutes had passed since I had walked away from that circle of mockery, but the decision forming in my mind felt final, precise, and irreversible. I went down the stairs slowly and deliberately, each step carrying me closer to a confrontation that I knew would permanently change the balance of power in this house. When I opened the back door, the scene looked exactly the same as when I had left it. Music blasted from the portable speakers. Guests crowded the patio with drinks in hand. Ethan stood near the grill, laughing and holding court like nothing in the world had changed. But something had changed. It was me. I walked straight across the yard toward the table where the sound system had been set up. Conversations continued around me, carefree and loud, with most people completely unaware that the man who owned everything they were enjoying had already made a decision that would end their night. Sitting beside the speakers was the wireless microphone, right where I hoped it would be. I picked it up calmly, with the same controlled precision I had once used while presenting solutions to executive boards and investors. The music continued for another second as I reached for the volume knob. Then the sound cut out. The sudden silence fell across the backyard like a curtain being dropped. Laughter died mid-breath. Bottles froze halfway to mouths. "The party is over," I said into the microphone, my voice carrying cleanly across the entire yard. "I am asking everyone to leave my property immediately." The words landed hard. People stared at me in shock. Conversation stopped completely. Even the drunkest guests understood that something serious had just happened. Ethan's face cycled through emotions in quick succession. Surprise, embarrassment, and then that familiar arrogance I had tolerated for years. "No one is leaving," he said, stepping forward and addressing the crowd instead of me. "This is my party. You are all welcome to stay as long as you want." As expected, Tyler moved to his side instantly, loyal in the way only people insulated from consequences ever are. "Come on, Mr. Carter," Tyler said. "Do not ruin the kid's birthday. It is his celebration." "This is my property," I replied into the microphone, my tone steady and factual. I have the legal authority to decide who stays here and who leaves." Logan laughed dismissively. "Relax. We are not damaging anything." Several guests shifted uneasily now, sensing that this argument had crossed into territory that could not be brushed off. Still, Ethan's inner circle stood firm, emboldened by years of never being told no. "Dad, put the microphone down and stop humiliating yourself," Ethan said, his voice dripping with condescension. "These are my friends. This is my party. You're acting like a crazy person." The microphone carried my reply to every corner of the yard. "I own this house. I pay the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, and the property taxes," I said evenly. "This is not your house, Ethan. It is mine." "So what?" he shot back, gesturing broadly for the audience. "You have supported me for years. That is what parents do. You cannot just throw people out because you're having some kind of breakdown." Rachel giggled from the patio table, clearly entertained by what she seemed to think was a dramatic family argument. A few guests murmured to each other, but no one moved toward the exits. "Actually, I can," I said, my voice still calm. "Any property owner has the right to ask people to leave. If they refuse, it becomes trespassing." That certainty finally cut through Ethan's alcohol-fueled confidence. He glanced around at his friends, searching for the same encouragement they had given him earlier. "You are not serious," Tyler said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "You would not really call the police on your own son's birthday." "Watch me." I placed the microphone back on the table and turned toward the house. "You have 5 minutes to leave voluntarily," I said over my shoulder. "After that, the police will remove you for trespassing." Behind me, Ethan's voice rose, no longer mocking, now edged with panic. "Dad, you cannot do this. These people are my friends." I stopped at the back door and looked back at the gathering one last time. 3 decades of hosting Ethan's friends, paying for their food, cleaning up their messes, enduring their disrespect in my own yard. "You told everyone you wanted me gone from your life," I said, my voice carrying without the microphone. "This is what that looks like. When I am gone, my house goes with me." I stepped inside and closed the door softly behind me, cutting off the sudden eruption of voices outside. Through the kitchen window, I watched confusion ripple through the crowd. Some guests started moving toward the side gate. Others stood frozen, unsure what to do. I walked to the wall phone and dialed 911. 25 minutes later, red and blue lights washed across the backyard, slicing through the darkness like a warning beacon. The party atmosphere evaporated instantly as guests noticed the patrol car pulling into the driveway. Officer Daniel Harper stepped through the side gate first, his uniform and badge commanding immediate attention from everyone still standing on my property. His partner followed him through the gate moments later, and both officers carried the unmistakable authority that comes with badges, uniforms, and the law itself. Officer Daniel Harper spoke first, his voice calm and neutral, the kind I had heard before in quiet neighborhoods when things went sideways. "Who called this in?" he asked. "I did," I said, stepping forward from near the back door. "This is my property. I told everyone the party was over and asked them to leave. They refused." Officer Harper nodded and pulled a small notepad from his pocket, scanning the remaining guests who suddenly found their drinks and shoes far more interesting than the situation unfolding. The music was completely off now, replaced by nervous murmurs and awkward laughter. "Can you confirm that you own the property, sir?" he asked. I handed him my driver's license along with a recent property tax statement I had already retrieved while waiting. Decades of home ownership had taught me to keep records close. He reviewed the documents carefully, then nodded again. His partner, Officer Karen Lewis, stepped farther onto the patio and raised her voice just enough to cut cleanly through the evening air. "Everyone currently on this property needs to leave immediately," she said. "The property owner has revoked permission for you to be here. Remaining on the premises constitutes trespassing." The reaction was instant and uneven. Several guests near the garden began gathering purses, jackets, and phones, clearly eager to remove themselves from anything involving police. Others turned toward Ethan, looking for direction from someone who suddenly had none to give. "This is not fair," Rachel said loudly, her voice rising above the confused murmurs. "We were invited. Ethan told us to come." "Ma'am," Officer Lewis replied evenly, "adult children living in a parent's home do not have the legal authority to override the property owner's wishes." Ethan stepped forward, his earlier confidence shaken, but still clinging to stubbornness. "Officers, this is ridiculous. It is my birthday. My father is just being petty." Officer Harper turned to him with professional detachment. "Sir, family disagreements do not change property law. If your father owns this house and wants guests to leave, they must comply." I stayed near the doorway and watched as the crowd began to thin. About half the guests were already heading toward the side gate, clearly deciding that no party was worth a police report. These were people who understood consequences. Ethan's core group stayed put. Tyler and Logan positioned themselves beside him, loyal in the way only people shielded from accountability tend to be. Rachel lingered nearby, drink still in hand, as if sheer disbelief might somehow reset the night. "How much time do they have?" I asked Officer Harper, my voice steady. "We give a reasonable opportunity to comply," he replied. "Refusal after official notice escalates the situation." The meaning of that hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Ethan's expression shifted again as the reality began to sink in. "Dad, you cannot seriously have people arrested over a birthday party," he said, though the bravado that had fueled him earlier was noticeably weaker. "I am not trying to get anyone arrested," I answered honestly. "I am exercising my rights as a property owner. What happens next depends entirely on the choices people make." Officer Lewis checked her watch and scanned the remaining guests. "Anyone who wants to leave voluntarily should do so now. Anyone still here in 5 minutes will be considered trespassing." That announcement triggered another wave of movement. Even a few of Ethan's supporters began drifting toward the gate, loyalty cracking under the weight of real consequences. What had started as a party of around 20 people shrank quickly to 6 or 7. Ethan looked around at what was left of his audience, finally understanding how thin his support truly was. Instead of backing down, though, he crossed his arms and planted his feet on the patio stones. "I live here," he said firmly. "This is my home, too." Officer Harper stepped closer, his patience clearly reaching its professional limit. His hand moved deliberately toward the handcuffs on his belt. "Young man," he said, "you are being instructed to leave. This is your final opportunity to comply voluntarily." Ethan lifted his chin, that familiar arrogance still clinging to him, but now it was backed by nothing but denial. "I am not leaving," he said. "This is ridiculous. You cannot arrest someone for being in their own house." "Yes, we can," Officer Lewis replied calmly as she moved to flank him, her positioning precise and practiced. And in that moment, the line between entitlement and reality finally disappeared. "You do not own this property," Officer Harper said firmly, "and you have been ordered to leave by the legal owner." The reality finally hit Ethan like a blast of cold water. His eyes jumped from one officer to the other, then locked onto me where I stood near the back door, and finally flicked toward the few friends who remained, frozen in stunned silence. "Dad," he said, his voice suddenly urgent, "tell them this is insane. I live here." "You live here by my permission," I replied evenly, "and that permission is withdrawn." Officer Harper stepped closer, the handcuffs now clearly visible. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "Are you serious right now?" Ethan's voice cracked, the first true sign that his arrogance was giving way to fear. "You are actually arresting me? Turn around, now." The moment stretched painfully long. I watched my son's face cycle through disbelief, anger, and then something raw and desperate as he realized that 28 years of dodging consequences had ended in this instant. Slowly, stiff with resentment, Ethan turned around. The sharp click of metal closing around his wrists echoed across the now quiet patio like a door slamming shut. "Ethan Carter," Officer Harper said calmly, "you are under arrest for criminal trespassing and failure to comply with a lawful order." Rachel gasped near the abandoned grill. "This cannot be happening. Mark, you cannot let them arrest your own son." I met her eyes without flinching. "I am not letting anyone do anything. I called the police because Ethan refused to respect my legal rights." As the officers guided him toward the side gate, Ethan twisted around to look at me. What stared back was something I had never seen before, pure hatred mixed with disbelief. "I will never forgive you for this," he snarled. "You think you won something tonight, but you just ruined your life." A few hours earlier, those words would have crushed me. Now, they only confirmed that this had been necessary. A son who could speak with that level of venom while being arrested for trespassing on his father's property had already severed the bond he was accusing me of destroying. "We will see," I said quietly. Officer Harper opened the back door of the patrol car and guided Ethan inside, shielding his head as he climbed into the seat. Through the window, I saw his face twisted with rage, his mouth moving in what were clearly more threats I was glad not to hear. Tyler stepped forward, all of his earlier confidence gone. "Officer, how long will he be held? When can we get him out?" "That depends on the charges and the judge," Officer Lewis replied. "Criminal trespassing can carry up to 2 weeks in county jail, along with fines." 2 weeks. The number settled into my mind with surprising calm. 14 days would be more than enough time to do what needed to be done. The engine started, red and blue lights flared again, and the patrol car slowly backed out of my driveway. I stood on the back porch and watched as my son was driven away, officially in police custody, facing consequences for the first time in his life. Rachel stood crying near the scattered decorations. Tyler and Logan gathered empty bottles with the awkward efficiency of people who had no idea what to do next. The party was over in every possible sense. Within minutes, even Ethan's closest supporters collected their belongings and slipped out through the side gate. The speakers sat silent. The grill cooled in the night air. Paper plates and plastic cups lay abandoned across surfaces I would clean later. For the first time in years, The backyard was mine again. I stood alone in the quiet, listening to the silence that replaced decades of entitlement and disrespect. And I knew this was only the beginning. The first morning without Ethan in the house felt surreal. I brewed coffee in complete silence and sat at the kitchen table without bracing myself for complaints, demands, or footsteps stomping overhead. The house felt lighter, as if it could finally breathe. A brief phone call to the county clerk confirmed what Officer Lewis had explained the night before. Ethan would serve 14 days for criminal trespassing and disorderly conduct. His release was scheduled for October 18th at 9 o'clock in the morning. Exactly 2 weeks. 2 weeks to carry out the plan that had solidified during those final moments on the porch. Over the next several days, I worked with the same deliberate precision that had defined my engineering career. I started by gathering facts, separating the fantasy Ethan lived in from the reality he had avoided. And the deeper I looked, the clearer everything became. I spread out my financial records across the dining table, covering the past 5 years in cold, undeniable numbers. Comparable rent in my neighborhood averaged about $2,800 per month. Utilities ran roughly $350. Groceries I had paid for came to around $400 monthly. When I added insurance, routine maintenance, property taxes, and all the miscellaneous expenses that never stopped piling up, Ethan's true cost of living came out to approximately $4,200 every single month. That was just over $50,000 a year. And that figure did not even include the extras, the parties, the gas money, the emergencies that somehow always required immediate cash. Supporting my adult son's unemployment had cost me far more than I had ever admitted to myself. As I continued my planning, I turned my attention to the real estate market. Comparable homes in my area were selling between $820,000 and $880,000, depending on condition and exact placement. Mine had been meticulously maintained, recently updated, and carefully cared for over decades. I had no doubt it would land near the top of that range. While I ran numbers and reviewed listings, one memory kept resurfacing. The job fair last November. I had driven Ethan to 3 different employment opportunities in a single day. I waited in parking lots while he submitted applications. The night before, I had even helped him rehearse interview answers, drawing on years of professional experience to give him an advantage. After each interview, he came back with an excuse. The manager seemed like a micromanager. The pay was insulting for someone with my potential. The commute would eat half my paycheck in gas. At the time, I had listened patiently. I wanted to believe him. A week later, a friend who worked in human resources called me quietly. She told me the truth. Ethan had intentionally sabotaged every interview. He arrived late. He dressed sloppily. He gave sarcastic, careless answers designed to guarantee rejection. When I confronted him, he did not even try to deny it. "Why would I take some minimum wage job," he said casually, "when you give me everything I need here?" That should have been the moment I changed everything. Instead, I absorbed his logic and kept going. I continued funding the very behavior that was destroying any chance of respect between us. By the end of the first week of his incarceration, my decision was no longer forming. It was complete. Ethan had told his friends loudly and publicly that he wanted me gone from his life. He repeated it. He meant it, and he delivered it with enough cruelty that there was no room for misunderstanding. Very well, I would disappear, but not as the broken father he expected to manipulate forever. The house would be sold while he sat in county jail, completely unaware that his free ride was ending for good. The money would fund a quiet, comfortable retirement somewhere far from California, somewhere he would never think to search for a father he had wished would vanish. During the second week, I researched retirement communities across the country, places where $850,000 could buy a modest home and years of independence. Arizona, Colorado, North Carolina, states with reasonable costs of living and no emotional ties to my past. Ethan's threats during his arrest had clarified something else as well. He did not see me as a father, he saw me as an obstacle. His promise that I would regret enforcing boundaries was the same manipulative language I had tolerated for years. This time, there would be no compromise, no backing down, no slow erosion of resolve. From an engineering perspective, the solution was simple. Remove the variable causing the system to fail. In this case, that variable was my continued financial support of someone who openly despised the person providing it. As Ethan's release date drew closer, I finalized everything. The real estate agent's business card sat beside my morning coffee, waiting. 28 years of guidance, sacrifice, and unconditional love had produced entitlement, contempt, and threats the moment boundaries appeared. It was time to show Ethan what disappearing actually meant. I picked up the phone and called Michelle Johnson, a real estate agent whose reviews consistently praised her speed, discretion, and efficiency. Her office occupied a corner suite in downtown San Jose, overlooking the city that had been my home for over 30 years. Framed certifications lined the walls beside photographs of recently sold properties, creating an atmosphere of quiet competence. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming in," she said, motioning toward the chair across from her desk. "You mentioned wanting to sell quickly. What is driving the timeline?" I sat down, placing my neatly organized property documents in front of me, arranged with the same methodical precision I had applied to every engineering project of my career. "Family circumstances," I said simply, "personal reasons that require immediate action." Her expression remained professionally neutral, a skill clearly honed through years of sensitive transactions. "I understand," she replied. "Let me review the property details, and we can talk about realistic expectations." As she opened the folder, I knew the process had officially begun. The property evaluation took just over 40 minutes and unfolded with the kind of precision I had come to respect. Michelle walked me through market trends, neighborhood comparisons, and pricing strategies with calm confidence. It was immediately clear that she knew exactly what she was doing. "Based on current market conditions and the specifics of your home," she said, tapping a few figures on her tablet, "I recommend listing at $850,000. At that price point, with proper staging and marketing, we should attract serious buyers within the first week." "That works perfectly," I replied. "The timeline aligns exactly with my needs." She smiled. "Excellent. Are you comfortable committing to that price?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. Then I leaned forward slightly, keeping the tone strictly professional. "I am also prepared to offer an incentive. If the house goes under contract within 7 days, I will add a $5,000 bonus on top of your standard commission." Her expression shifted instantly. Not greed, but focused enthusiasm. "How firm is that offer?" she asked. "Very," I said. "A signed contract by next Tuesday?" "Mr. Carter," she said, straightening in her chair, "you have my full attention. Let us visit the property this afternoon so I can do a complete evaluation." The drive back to my house took about 20 minutes, through streets I had traveled thousands of times over the years. Soon, they would be memories rather than routines. Michelle followed in her own car, her professional camera equipment clearly visible through the rear window. Walking through my home with someone assessing its market value stirred emotions I had not expected. Every room carried echoes of Ethan's childhood. Birthday cakes at the kitchen counter, homework spread across the dining table, quiet evenings that slowly gave way to entitlement and resentment. "The maintenance here is exceptional," Michelle said as she photographed the remodeled kitchen and the refinished hardwood floors. "Homes in this condition photograph beautifully. Have you considered professional staging?" "Whatever you recommend," I replied. "Cost is not the priority." She moved efficiently from room to room, noting architectural details, natural light, and features buyers in this market valued most. Her conclusions matched my own research. "Honestly," she said, "houses like this do not sit long. With the right pricing and exposure, I would expect multiple offers by the weekend." Multiple offers meant leverage, competition, possibly a final sale price above our target. Ethan's 2-week incarceration was giving me advantages I had not anticipated when this plan first formed. Back at her office, the paperwork moved quickly. Disclosure forms, marketing agreements, timelines. Everything was handled with speed and professionalism. "I will have professional photographs taken tomorrow morning," she explained as she organized the signed documents. "The listing goes live Thursday. Open house Saturday and Sunday." Given the bonus structure, this sale clearly had top priority. "I will keep you updated in real time," she added. "Every showing, every inquiry, every offer." Before I left, she paused and looked at me thoughtfully. "Mr. Carter, may I ask, are you relocating? This feels like more than downsizing." "It is," I said truthfully, "a complete life change. Sometimes circumstances make drastic decisions necessary." She nodded, clearly familiar with clients whose lives were pivoting sharply. "I will make sure the transition is as smooth as possible." The signed contracts felt solid in my hands as I walked out. 7 days remained until Ethan's scheduled release. Everything was now documented, legal, and irreversible. "One more thing," I said, turning back at the door. "I may need very precise timing. Please notify me immediately about any serious interest." "Of course," she said. "This is going to move fast." I drove away with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally turned years of indecision into decisive action. The house that had supported entitlement for nearly 3 decades would soon belong to people who valued it. Next, I needed one final piece of information. I drove toward Santa Clara County Jail, a 30-minute trip through morning traffic that gave me time to prepare for what would likely be my last involvement in any part of Ethan's current situation. The facility rose from the industrial landscape like a concrete monument to consequences, exactly the lesson my son was about to learn the hard way. The jail's security process was rigid and highly structured. First came identification checks, then the metal detector, then visitor registration, steps that turned ordinary citizens into names on a clipboard and numbers in a system. I could not help noticing how efficient it all was. Everything moved with an institutional rhythm designed to manage people quickly and without emotion. At the visitor information desk, I slid my driver's license across the polished counter. "I need information about an inmate," I said. The corrections officer behind the desk glanced at my identification. His nameplate read, Sergeant Alan Carter. No relation, even though we shared a last name. His expression stayed neutral, the kind of professional blankness that defined the entire building. The uniform and badge carried authority that had nothing to do with personal stories or family pain. "Name of the inmate?" he asked. "Ethan Carter," I answered. "He is serving 2 weeks for criminal trespassing." The sergeant's fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced speed. Watching him, it struck me how the system had reduced my son to a booking record, a cell assignment, and a release schedule. In this place, there were no excuses, no speeches, no charm, just files and procedures. "Ethan Carter," he said after a moment, eyes scanning the screen. "Booked October 4th. He looked up briefly, still expressionless. "Release is scheduled for October 18th at 9:00 a.m. "Perfect," I said, because the timing fit precisely with what I needed. "Thank you." I kept my tone professional, the same steady voice I had used all day. "Is there anything I should know about the release process?" I asked. "Standard procedures," he replied. "He will be processed out through this building, personal property returned, transportation voucher available upon request." Then he looked at me again, slightly more attentive. "Would you like to visit with him while you are here?" The question hung in the air like the last trace of smoke after a fire goes out. This was the moment where I could have chosen the traditional path. Go in, look him in the eye, measure his attitude, maybe offer a warning, maybe give him a chance. But I knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew exactly what he would do with anything I offered. "No," I said, "that will not be necessary." 4 words, plain and final. The sergeant did not react. Family emotions were not his job. He was there to process requests, not interpret relationships. "Visiting hours are daily from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock, he said, still courteous. "If you change your mind." "I appreciate the information," I replied, "but I have what I came for." And that was it. The entire exchange ended with the same sterile efficiency it began with. No personal questions, no judgment, no curiosity about why a father would request a release date and refuse a visit. Walking back out through the security checkpoints felt like emerging from a controlled environment designed to strip people down to compliance and routine. Ethan had been living inside that system for 10 days, learning what accountability actually looks like when excuses stop working. On the drive home, I ran the timeline again in my head. October 18th, 9 a.m. Ethan would walk out of county jail expecting to return to the house that had protected his entitlement for nearly 3 decades. Instead, he would step into the consequences of his own words. He told people he wanted me gone. He had no idea I had finally listened. Michelle's confidence and my own market research suggested the house would likely sell by the weekend. That gave me several days to coordinate the closing with Ethan's release date. The place he treated like a permanent free ride would soon belong to strangers who actually valued having a home. The plan satisfied the methodical part of me completely. Variables controlled, timeline synchronized, resources allocated, outcomes secured through legal processes Ethan himself had triggered. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a moment and looked at the house as if it were already a memory. Every payment, every repair, every utility bill had supported someone who wished I would disappear from his life forever. Tomorrow, I would follow up with Michelle about showings and interest. For now, I knew Ethan was exactly where consequences had placed him, still unaware that I was putting the final pieces in motion. I had barely reached the front door when my phone rang. Michelle's name flashed on the caller ID. I answered as I stepped inside, the familiar entryway suddenly feeling temporary. "Michelle speaking," she said brightly. "This is Mark Carter," I replied. "Did you call?" I asked as soon as I answered. "I did, and I have excellent news," Michelle said, her voice bright with momentum. "The Garcia family accepted our asking price. Full cash offer, no contingencies. Closing is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9:30. The timing could not have been more precise. Ethan was scheduled for release at 9 o'clock. That gave him just enough time to make his way back to the house before realizing that the life he expected to resume no longer existed in any meaningful way. "Outstanding work, Michelle," I said. "That bonus is absolutely deserved." The next 24 hours collapsed into a tightly managed sequence of tasks that would have impressed even the most demanding project manager. Moving logistics, final signatures, key transfers, every step coordinated with the same discipline I once applied to large-scale engineering projects. This was not impulsive. It was executed. Carlos and Maria Garcia arrived mid-morning with their 2 children and a moving truck packed with boxes and optimism. Their energy was unmistakable, the excitement of people beginning a new chapter. Watching them stirred memories of when I first bought that house 30 years earlier, back when Ethan still said thank you for birthday presents and asked for bedtime stories. "Mr. Carter, thank you so much for moving so quickly," Maria said as their children raced through the living room laughing. "We know you needed a fast sale." "Life changes faster than expected sometimes," I replied. I handed Carlos the garage door opener and the house keys. The weight of that simple exchange felt symbolic. Ownership passing to people who would value the space rather than exploit it. "There is one small favor I would like to ask," I added. "Of course," Carlos said immediately. "My son may stop by tomorrow," I explained. "He is traveling and will not know about the sale. If he does, could you please give him this?" I handed Maria a sealed envelope with Ethan Carter written neatly across the front in my careful handwriting. She accepted it without hesitation. The way people do when they understand family transitions can be complicated. The letter inside had gone through several drafts before I finalized it. It was brief, controlled, unavoidable. "Ethan, you said you wanted me to disappear from your life forever. I have decided to honor that request. The house has been sold. I am traveling indefinitely and will not be reachable. You now have the independence you have always demanded." Mark 40 words. Enough to summarize 28 years of financial support, emotional investment, and escalating disrespect. There was no forwarding address, no explanation, no opening for negotiation or manipulation. Once the Garcia family was settled and the paperwork complete, I walked next door to Frank Collins's house with a single suitcase and one final logistical request. Frank had been my neighbor for 15 years. Dependable, practical, the kind of man who brought in packages and helped shovel snow without asking questions. "Frank, could I stay with you for a couple of days?" I asked. I am between living arrangements." "Of course," he said immediately, stepping aside. "What happened with the house?" "I sold it," I answered. "It was time for major changes." He studied my face for a moment, concern mixed with curiosity, then nodded. Frank had always known when not to pry. "What about Ethan?" he asked carefully. "Where will he stay when he gets back from wherever he has been?" "Ethan is an adult," I said. "He will make his own arrangements." Something in my tone made the subject end there. Frank nodded and showed me to the guest room. The room was comfortable, but its real value was the view. From the window, I had a clear sight line to my former home's front entrance. That evening, I sat quietly and watched the Garcia family unpack boxes, arrange furniture, and settle into rooms where Ethan had spent years assuming my support would never end. Tomorrow morning, he would walk up that same driveway expecting comfort and familiarity. Instead, he would meet reality. Frank knocked on the door around 10 o'clock with fresh towels and the same quiet generosity that defined our friendship. "Everything you need is in here, Mark," he said. "Everything is perfect," I replied. "Thank you." "Stay as long as you need," he added. "Whatever is happening with your family, you are not alone." After he left, I sat by the window one last time. The final image before I turned off the light was Maria Garcia closing the curtains in what had once been Ethan's bedroom. The next morning arrived exactly on schedule. At 9:30 sharp, I watched from Frank's upstairs window as Ethan rounded the corner onto the street. He walked with the easy confidence of someone returning to a place he believed was still his. He looked exactly like a man who thought nothing had truly changed. He looked thinner than I remembered, still wearing the same clothes he had been arrested in. In his hand was a small, clear plastic bag holding whatever personal items the jail had returned to him. There was no humility in his posture, no sign of reflection. He walked like someone fully expecting to pick up his old life exactly where he had left it. Ethan stepped onto the front walkway without hesitation and reached into his pocket for keys that no longer fit locks that no longer belonged to him. Watching him move with that automatic confidence toward a house owned by strangers felt like the clearest symbol of everything that had been broken between us. The Garcia children were playing in the front yard while Carlos unloaded boxes from the moving truck. The sound of unfamiliar voices speaking Spanish made Ethan stop short. Confusion crossed his face as his expectations collided with reality. "Excuse me?" he said sharply, his voice carrying the same entitled edge I had heard my entire life. "Who are you people, and what are you doing in my house?" Carlos straightened up, clearly surprised but polite. "Sorry, friend, but this is our house now. We bought it last week." "That's not possible," Ethan snapped, his voice rising with practiced indignation. "I live here. This is my family's home." Maria appeared in the doorway, drawn outside by the tension. She assessed Ethan calmly, the way a mother does when stepping into an unfamiliar conflict. "Are you Ethan Carter?" she asked carefully. "Yes," he said, relief flashing briefly across his face. "Finally, someone reasonable. Now tell me why strangers are in my house." "The previous owner left something for you," she said gently. She stepped back inside and returned with the sealed envelope, the one that held 2 weeks of planning compressed into a few devastating sentences. Ethan took it reluctantly, suspicion written all over his face. His hands shook just slightly as he tore it open. From Frank's upstairs window, I leaned forward and watched every change in my son's expression as he read the note that would finish the lesson he had demanded. "Ethan, you said you wanted me to disappear from your life forever. I have decided to honor that request. The house has been sold. I am traveling indefinitely and will not be reachable. You now have the independence you always demanded. Mark." I watched the emotions roll across his face exactly as I had expected. Confusion, disbelief, then understanding, and finally, absolute devastation. "This can't be real," he whispered, the entitlement drained completely from his voice. "He can't just sell our house and vanish. That's not how families work." "I'm sorry," Carlos said sincerely, "but we have all the legal documents. The sale closed yesterday morning." Ethan's knees buckled slightly, and he leaned against the mailbox, no longer his, just to stay upright. The plastic bag slipped from his fingers and spilled his few belongings onto the sidewalk that used to lead to his front door. "Where am I supposed to live?" he whispered. "How am I supposed to eat?" The words were not demands anymore. They were desperate, frightened questions. Maria and Carlos exchanged uneasy looks. They were decent people caught in the aftermath of a family reckoning they had never asked to witness. From my hidden vantage point, I felt something complicated twist inside my chest. The justice was exact. He had received precisely what he asked for, and yet, watching his collapse stirred an uncomfortable trace of something that felt like pity. Ethan stood there on the sidewalk, reading the note again and again as if repetition might change its meaning. Behind him, the house buzzed with the sounds of a family settling into a home they would appreciate. In front of it stood a man who finally understood the cost of contempt. 28 years of enabling ended with 40 words and a signed contract. The lesson was complete. After a long moment, Ethan folded the note carefully and walked away without saying another word to the Garcia family. I stayed by the window long after he disappeared around the corner. What lingered in my mind was not his anger, but the tears, real ones, not manipulative, not theatrical. The raw sobs of someone who had finally understood what he had destroyed. For most of my life, I had wondered whether any genuine emotion lived beneath his entitlement. I finally had my answer. It had just come far too late. That evening, Frank found me in the kitchen, staring into a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "Rough day watching the neighborhood drama?" he asked carefully. "Something like that," I said. He hesitated, then nodded toward the window. That young man seemed pretty shaken about losing his family home. I met Frank's eyes and saw genuine concern there, the kind that comes from witnessing pain without knowing the full history behind it. "Sometimes consequences take years to arrive," I said quietly, "but they always show up eventually." Frank nodded, the expression of someone who had lived long enough to know that justice rarely follows a clean schedule, but almost never disappears altogether. "Thank you for letting me stay here," I added, standing up from the kitchen table where I had spent so many hours thinking, calculating, and finally deciding. "I am heading out tomorrow morning." "Where are you going?" he asked. "Toward the ocean," I said. "It is time to start over completely." He did not press for details. Frank had the good sense to understand that some life changes need space, not explanations. His quiet support during this transition had been exactly what I needed, steady, respectful, and without demands. "You have my number if you ever need anything," he said. We both understood this was not just a casual goodbye. It was the kind that comes when someone is leaving more than a house behind. Morning arrived wrapped in that particular California sunlight that makes fresh starts feel inevitable. I loaded my single suitcase into the car I had barely driven over the past 2 weeks and felt lighter than I had in decades. No clutter, no obligations, no weight pressing on my chest. Frank stood on his porch as I backed out of the driveway, lifting a hand in farewell. 30 years of neighborly respect fit neatly into that one small gesture. I waved back, genuinely grateful for his presence during the most difficult moral decision of my life. The highway stretched west, pulling me toward the Pacific and away from everything I had known. The money from the sale sat securely in my account. No one depended on me. No one expected me to finance their comfort or absorb their contempt. Ethan had gotten exactly what he claimed to want, a father who disappeared from his life. I had granted his birthday wish with the same precision I once applied to complex engineering problems. The justice itself was clean and lawful, delivered through natural consequences rather than cruelty. And yet, his tears had altered something inside me. Not the outcome. That remained right and necessary. But my understanding of who he was beneath the entitlement. He was still my son, still capable of real emotion, still human, despite years of behavior that suggested otherwise. That recognition did not change my decision to leave, nor did it weaken my belief that boundaries and consequences were overdue, but it added depth to what had begun as simple justice and ended as something closer to wisdom. The coastal highway came into view, opening into long stretches of ocean, small towns, and unfamiliar roads where no one knew my history or expected anything from me. Places where 62 years of experience might finally be valued instead of exploited. I had spent 28 years enabling someone who wished I would vanish. Now I was honoring that wish and building the life I should have chosen long ago. Sunlight flashed across the windshield as I drove forward, carrying nothing but a suitcase and the understanding that respect, once lost, can only be reclaimed through action, never through pleading. Behind me, Ethan was learning the same lesson from the opposite direction. Ahead of me, the ocean waited, wide horizons, unanswered questions, and a version of myself I had never been allowed to meet. It was time to find out who I was when no one needed anything from me.